Hello, friends. Welcome. Good evening. I really want to apologize for earlier today. I was getting all my streams for this week set up, and you enter a time in StreamYard, and then you have to go down to the bottom and and schedule it. And I've kind of been loopy and goofy today, so if I get loopy and goofy this evening, please stop me. So let's do a sound check. Is everybody hearing me? Am I live? I don't want to go through another 15 minutes of talking to find out that I'm not live. So let me see. We've got Diana 2 and Stray Kitten and Little Lone Prepper. Welcome. Good to see you all. Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. All right. Thank you, Triple J. Appreciate it. Welcome, by the way. Welcome, Utah Mike. So all good to see you. So let me tell you why I'm so goofy today. I went out early this morning to water all my garden. And you know things are going to be bad when it happens in slow motion, right? So somehow or other, I got my foot tangled up in the hose as I was watering things. And I turned around and I started to do kind of like a cartwheel, type of a trip in the backyard. So I threw the hose and did my cartwheel dance, around 1/3 of the backyard, it seems like, and ended up falling on the hip that I broke last time when I tripped in the backyard. So thank God the hip I fell on is the one that's titanium instead of the other one. But so that's been kind of giving me on and off type of an issue today. So if for any reason I sound loopy or whatever, just let me know and we'll stop it. I would much rather make sense than be here for any kind of a crazy thing. Food Forest Permaculture, good evening. Good to see you. Kind of an exciting topic tonight. We're talking about domestic policies and a lot of great things that are really appropriate to today and what's going on in our government and our society and everything else. So some really, really good, interesting topics we can talk about. I was using, we have these little bitty, I get the bag of Hershey Nuggets, and they're the little bitty bars, kind of like a gold bar of chocolates. And I was using the wrappers for my place markers where I have all my highlighting and everything else on things I wanted to talk about tonight. And I set the book down next to me because I put it down and I was studying this one instead. And so all of a sudden, one of the Chihuahuas was up here next to me. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And she was pulling out all of my page markers and trying to chew the chocolate off of the page markers or off of my, what I was using as page markers. And so I don't have all my pages marked anymore. That's how life goes. Okay, let me get my eyes on, and we'll see what we can do here. And oh gosh, tornadoes, rain. My COPD is really, really bad because of all the burning that's going on in the Yucatan Peninsula, and all that smoke is coming up here. So I've almost gone to the emergency room for breathing issues, but I've gone through, I'm doing my nebulizer treatments quite regularly. And so it's just something else. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, Helen took them all to the bedroom. So all three of them, we've got three. We adopted one, there was a, really pretty Chihuahua at the shelter, the dog shelter. And so we went to pick her up, and it turns out there was a litter of three, and the third one had already been adopted. And that was the one that Helen was attracted to in the paper. So she took the second one she wanted. Well, and then the shelter says, we'll tell you what, we'll give you both. These are siblings. We'll give you both of them for the price of one, neutering, shots, everything for the price of one. So we said, okay. And we took those. Then we got home, and my daughter had a baby. And she had this black long-haired Chihuahua teacup since she was a sophomore in college. So this was like 2008, 2009. And of course, the Chihuahua was jealous of the baby. So we got to inherit the Chihuahua because I was her favorite person. So we have 3 Chihuahuas. But anyhow, Celtic Grandma, good evening. Welcome. Kaylin Strain, welcome. Good evening. So, yep, we have challenges, but we're blessed too. I'm still here, so I'm blessed with that. Helen and I had that discussion again today. Just one of the things I wanted to kind of stress today. I know it's not really what it's designed for, but Dad fought in World War II and Korea and Vietnam, so. He was a career soldier, and I guess that's what kind of enticed me to become a career soldier. And I know it's not appropriate because he did not die in action over in any of those conflicts in which he was involved, but I have plenty of friends who were. And so just today, thinking about all the friends, because we had a very high, the high school I graduated from had the contract to serve all the military housing for Fort Bliss. So we had a very high proportion of our students were children of Army. And so we had a lot of us go to Vietnam, and we had a lot of us not come back from Vietnam. So this is kind of one of those days where it just kind of strikes you a little bit. And I kind of extended that and thought about Dad and Mom. Dad died in 2011 and Mom died in 2019. And, just, gosh, I wish I'd been a better son. Gosh, I wish I had taken better care of my parents, and I had been more respectful, more, I just wish I could have given to them as much as they gave to me. And so, just one of those days where you kind of sit back and you say, gosh, I wish I could be a better person. And so that's my daily prayer, is make me a better person. Let me exude the love. We got into this conversation. My wife is not the same denomination that I am. And so she went to church with me yesterday. And I've gone to church with her quite a bit. And she says, you've never tried to convert me. We've been married 40 years and you've never tried to convert me. Why is that? And I said, because that's not the way we are. We believe that we convert people by our actions and by how we are and how we live our religion, more so than trying to force it on people. And so we had that conversation yesterday, and she had talked to the deacon, and so the deacon had told her that he would give her special dispensation and recommend her for baptism. Since I'm an RCIA instructor, I'm one of the primary instructors for the catechism. For conversion. And so he said, I'm sure you get all that at home. And in a way she does, but I don't proselytize at home either. So, it's just kind of strange. But gosh, if I could just be a better person, if I could show more love and be more like Christ, I would be a very, very happy person. I'm happy as it is, but let's get into the topic tonight. So we've only got 3 chapters left. American Government. This is the book that's used in our high schools here in Texas. Karen O'Connor, Larry Sabato, and Alexandra Yanis are the authors of this fantastic book. And just 2010, so right at the beginning of Obama's administration. So a lot of things are going on. Let's talk about the roots of public policy, the policymaking process. So that's kind of prescribed in a sense under Article 1 of the Constitution. Now remember that Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the authority to write the laws. So they write the laws, then they basically turn those laws over to the executive branch to administer those laws. But they also give them rulemaking authority. So once Congress passes a law and say, okay, we're turning it over to the executive branch to enforce this, then they have the ability to pass their own rules. So now we have to get into a rulemaking situation of how do we pass rules that are acceptable to the public at large. So we also call that policymaking. So the policymaking process is basically 7 steps. Step 1 is problem recognition. So we say, hey, we have a problem and we need to solve this problem. And step 2 is to set an agenda, which means that the government recognizes that the policy is worthy of government intervention. Okay. Then 3, we formulate the policy, and that is we identify an alternative approach to addressing the problem. We get several of those. Okay. We bring those together. Then we have public hearings. We have experts. We have all this discussion and debate. Then we just determine the best policy. And then the next step is policy adoption. So we formally have all those hearings, all those assessments. We also do a little bit of Congressional Budget Office saying, which one's going to be the most cost effective, not necessarily the cheapest, but the most cost effective, the best value. And then once we've done that, then we go into the budgeting process, policy implementation, and then policy evaluation. So after we've done something to correct the problem, then we have to come back and say, did we correct the problem? Or, as is 99.9% of the time, did we, by trying to correct the problem, actually create new problems? Let me see. Kaylin says that her step-grandpa on her mom's side was in World War II and Vietnam, Army infantry, first, then Air Force, but not a pilot. Let's see. In World War II, my dad was a combat engineer. So he built the pontoon bridges that crossed rivers. And then in Korea, he was artillery, and he was at the Chosin Reservoir with the triple nickel, which was a 8-inch artillery battalion. And they had significant losses coming back out of the Chosin Reservoir. And then in Vietnam, he was down around Saigon. I almost said Hanoi. He was down around Saigon. But he was air defense artillery. So he basically he was in Hawk missiles. So it was air defense protecting Tan Son Nhut and some of the other air bases. So, that we were pretty lucky there. With my MOS, my military occupational specialty MOS, I was not supposed to be in a combat zone. So they did not want me to be captured and interrogated. They had enough of us captured and interrogated in 1969. And it's the last time that we had, and it's the only ship we've had captured, and it's still on public display in Haiphong. And that is not Haiphong, it was in Korea. And that's the USS Pueblo, GER-2. And that's it. So that had that had 79 sailors on it who did what I do, or did what I did. Only they do it in Korean and I did it in Russian. So, but same thing. Okay. So when we talk about agenda setting, there's a systemic agenda and a governmental or institutional agenda, and then there's agenda setting. So we need to kind of formalize these terms. Now, you're going to hear some of these terms because a lot of times we will adapt terms and use them in other things. So you're going to hear things such as systemic racism or institutional racism. This is where we get those terms from. So they don't necessarily mean what you think they mean, okay? People are using them because they sound good, but the actual meaning is something else. I can get into some HR things where we can get into the same issue. So an agenda is a set of issues to be discussed or given attention. A systemic agenda is a discussion agenda. It consists of all public issues that are viewed as requiring governmental attention or intervention. Then an institutional agenda or governmental agenda is problems in which public officials feel obliged to devote active and serious attention to that issue. And then agenda setting is the constant process of forming the sets of issues to be addressed by government. Okay, so there are people, let's take another one. Okay, this is an HR example. I'm going to forget my laws now. Golly. National Labor Relations Act. No. Anyhow, there's a law passed. Okay. And yeah, it is the NLRA, National Labor Relations Act. And so anyhow, it says that you have a right to work. So what does a right to work mean? And so basically there are three different types of jobs. There's a union job, there's a union shop job, and there's a right to work law. So the right to work law does not mean you have a right to a job. It means you have a right to get a job without being a member of a union. Okay, so you don't have to join a union in order to get a job. If you're in a union shop state, then basically the company posts that job with the union. You have to join that union that controls that job in order to get the job from the union. And then they have union states. And so a union state, basically, you apply to the company for that job, get accepted into that job, and then the minute you get that job, you have to join the union and be represented by the union. So those are your three choices: union shop, union, and right to work. Okay. Theoxos. So no, on the contrary, if you were a small country like North Korea and had captured what they call a combat ship, because it had 350 caliber machine guns on it, if you capture a combatant ship of the largest, strongest navy in the world, you maintain it as almost like we do the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers in Washington, D.C. And the reason is because that is one of the largest national monuments and tourist attractions for North Koreans to go to that they have. And so they maintain it extremely well because they want to be a source of national pride. Look what we got from the Americans. Hello, Laura. Welcome. Good to see you. Food Forest Permaculture. Good evening. Welcome. Good to see you as well. Okay, so now in policy formulation, we have routine formulation, analogous formulation, and creative formulation. So routine formulation is just the process of altering an existing law so that you can adapt it to its current needs, okay? Or you can create even a new law in relation to a new need, but it's going to be pretty much predictable how that's going to be. An analogous formulation says that we're going to draw an experience of this law over here for this problem. We're going to create something similar to it, but in a totally different vein for a different problem over here. Okay, so for an analogous solution, we say you have to be 21 to drink. Okay, you're not responsible enough to be an adult until you're 21, so we can't give you the right to drink until you're 21. Okay, now I know it goes very state by state, but the other thing they can do is they say, okay, well, if you're not old enough to vote, if you're not old enough to drink, then you're not old enough to vote. And if you're not old enough to vote, you're not old enough to get married. And if you're not old enough to get married, then you're not old enough to buy a weapon. So that's how an analogous type of a formulation goes. They take one law and they say, hey, if this law applies here, then it should also apply here because we're going to use the same thought process. Okay. Now, of course, the U.S. Federal government says 18 is the voting age, but we still have, 21 as an age of majority for drinking, smoking, and a couple other issues in most states. So that analogous thing can come back and bite you if you're not careful. So we have to be careful about that. Then the third one is creative formulation, where it involves attempts to develop new or unprecedented proposals that represent a departure from the way that we've handled things in the past. And so probably one of the biggest examples of that is Obamacare. Okay. So with Obamacare, we had four. We had four different ways of getting health care. So number one, I guess we could say five. Number one is you don't get health care at all, okay, because you can't afford it. Number two is you pay cash. Number three, you have paid cash to a third party, an insurance company, and that insurance company then handles the majority of the cost of that insurance or of paying that medical bill. Number four is you have Medicare if you're 65 or older. And then number six is you have Medicaid if you're 65 or older and or poor below the poverty threshold. So there were five different ways of doing that. And so a lot of people were still in that first category. They couldn't afford medical care at all. They couldn't get Medicaid. So we decided that we're going to, instead of handling it at a state level, which is Medicaid, we were going to handle it at a national level. Now, back in the early 90s, when President Clinton was the president, they were considering something, and we called it Hillary Care because Hillary was in charge of formulating the process. I just happened to be the HR director at a hospital when all this was going about. So Hillary Care involved what we called capitation. And with capitation, you were going to pay a tax to the federal government. Let's say you're going to pay a 1% tax on your income to the federal government, and that was going to be your health care tax. Then that 1% would be divided back down, and you were going to create medical districts. So let's say where I was working at St. David's, they had a 1.5 mile radius around the hospital that they calculated the number of citizens who were in that area, and they were going to give what they call capitation, which means that they were going to give them, let's say, $15 per person in that area. And then that was what they were going to pay you per month in order to handle all of the medical issues for those covered persons in that area. So realizing that, there are some high risk people, there are some people who never go to the doctor, there's all these different things. So we realized back then that we probably had to change our model of expenses. And so that's one of the reasons why now you don't see as many RNs as you used to. You see a lot more LVNs, licensed vocational nurses, and a lot more clinical nurse assistants, CNAs, assisting the RNs. So whereas we used to maybe have on a gen surg ward, which is a general surgical ward, maybe we had a patient to nurse ratio of 4 to 1. So one RN would take care of 4 patients in a gen surg ward. We've changed that to where you have 1 RN per 8 in a gen surg ward, and then 1 CNA and 1 LVN per 8. So that, now you're getting a less expensive solution to deliver care to those same customers or those same patients. Yeah, we can talk about that. That's not an issue. So that law is called I'm forgetting all my HR laws. You can tell I've been retired for a while, huh? It gives either party, the employee or the employer, the right to terminate the employment. It's called at-will employment. That's what the law is, at-will employment. And so with the at-will employment law, it says that either party, the employer or the employee, has the right to terminate the employment contract the employment agreement, because only unions have contracts, has the right to terminate the employment agreement at any time with or without advance notice, with or without any cause. Okay. So the same law that gives the employer the right to say you're fired is the same law that gives you the right to say I quit. Okay. Now, what Phioxerus is talking about is quite often there are what we call golden handcuffs to that employment. So in order for you, let's say that your company says in their policies, you can quit at any time, and we will pay you your accrued vacation, accrued unused vacation, as long as you give us 2 weeks advance notice of your termination. So if you want, let's say you have 30 days worth of leave that you've accrued, and you want to quit your job, but you want to cash in and get that 30 days worth of paid vacation or paid leave, then you have to give 2 weeks notice. Okay. So, and 2 weeks is the standard rather than a month, unless you are a salaried employee. So salaried employees, which, typically those who are not subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that is overtime. Sometimes they require, especially if you're in a manager or director or VP position, then for those higher ones where it's more difficult to find a replacement for you, then yeah, they're going to require 30 days notice. So typically for a wage earner, it's going to be 2 weeks. For a salaried employee, it's going to be a month. But it's just that the golden handcuffs are there. You can still quit and say and walk out immediately. That's not an issue. It's just you're going to forfeit certain things. You're going to forfeit paid and accrued vacation. You can forfeit, for example, when I left Dell, we had stock options that were given to us on a regular basis, but they had a 5-year vesting period. So I would get, let's say, 2,000 shares of stock as an option, and that vested 20% per year. So when I quit, then if I quit at, the options I got 5 years ago, I had already earned all of those. I could sell those. The options I got 4 years ago, 80% of those belong to me, 20% still belong to the company. The options they gave me 3 years ago, 60% of those belong to me, 40% belong to the company. Or the other way around. The options I got 2 years ago, 80% belong to the company, 20% to me. And the stocks I got this year, 100% belongs to the company, still 0% to me, because I haven't got a year vesting in those. So that's another form of golden handcuffs, is the award of stock option grants and the vesting period. So you're authorized one of two ways, either 5 or 7 years vesting, according to federal law. Able to get Obamacare for less than the BCBS I was paying for when you worked. And so so when Obamacare came in, I happened to be the HR director for a homeless shelter, and we had 185 employees. So what happens is, under Obamacare, what it is, it's a high deductible minimum coverage insurance plan in most cases. And so they do offer FSAs and HSAs, health savings accounts and flex spending accounts, in order to kind of make up for that. But let's say that you're going to have a $6,000 deductible for a cataclysmic event. And so you're only going to pay, what my employees were paying for an employee with a $6,000 deductible, they were paying $100 a month. Whereas they had been paying for a $10 deductible for themselves and 50% coverage. No, I'm sorry. And a $10 deductible for their family, but we only paid 50% of that. They were paying $325 a month. So now they or their family could get sick and they would pay $10 copay to go to the doctor, or $10 a day to go to the hospital. And they were paying $325 a month, but they thought that was more expensive than paying $100 a month. But if anything happens, they're going to have to pay $6,000 up until that time. $6,000 that has come out of their pocket, no insurance kicks in. So that was one of the bad things about Obama. It looked good on the surface, but when you got down to it, I had more employees who got into financial problems because they had Obamacare than anything else. Okay, so we're into a policy adoption, which of course is the normal procedures. Now, the other thing here, little on prepper, is in Texas. Now, I can't tell you other states. I can tell you in Texas, one of the biggest expenses we have is through the Unemployment Commission. And so if it is determined by the Unemployment Commission that you terminated an employee for a non-justifiable reason, then you have to pay unemployment insurance, okay? So you start out, the lowest you can get as an employer in Texas is you pay 0.8% of your total payroll into the state unemployment insurance fund. I'm going to pay that whether I fire anybody or not. As I fire more and more people, especially people who are eligible for unemployment insurance, then that rate goes up. So if I fire people indiscriminately, I could end up paying as much as 12% of my total payroll on a monthly basis into the unemployment insurance fund. So it behooves a company to not willy-nilly terminate people, that they have to do it for just cause. And there are certain just causes for which that occurs. And I have never, in my 31 years in human resources, I never lost a termination cause and had to give unemployment, because I made sure that we were terminating only for valid reasons and that there was plenty of notice given, that there was plenty of opportunity to correct the deficiency, unless it was an egregious deficiency. But because of the fact that we had our documentation and everything was done correctly, and we terminated only as a final resort, I never ended up paying any kind of unemployment. The only time I paid anything was I had one guy that we terminated because he struck a homeless person. He was walking in the door. Homeless person said something to him. I guess he had a bad night. He knocked the homeless person out. That was against our policies, no physical violence. So we terminated him for that. He had never updated his mailing address, so I sent his final paycheck to his address that was on file. And then he came in and threw a fit and was very belligerent the day that he was supposed to have received his final check, and he hadn't received it. And he says, "You're in violation of the law." I said, "No, I've got I've got certified mail here that I mailed it to your last address." "Well, that's not where I live." And I said, "Well, that's where you told us you lived, so that's where I sent it." And he says, "Oh, I don't live there. My grandmother hasn't, so she's not going to give it to me." So I had a special thing done, and I gave him a second check. Turns out his grandmother had given him the first one, and he cashed both of them. So that's the closest I ever came to losing in unemployment. Was this guy got two termination checks, because in Texas you can't cancel a check. Okay, so once it's written, it's valid. You just can't cancel it. Okay. Yep. Okay, let me see. Gosh, I jumped here a whole bunch. I guess I'm really behind in the comments. I'm sorry. Unless you work for the state, then you lose your leave when you separate from employment. Not necessarily. I was also an HR director for the Texas Air Control Board, which is air pollution control. It merged with 12 other agencies under Senate Bill 2 in 1992, and that was under what was her name? Governor Richardson. But anyhow, so we had a lot of people, because we merged 13 agencies, a lot of people lost their jobs. And I became the HR director for the merged agency. But anyhow, you don't lose your leave when you, for the state of Texas. That's all I can speak for. You don't lose your leave, and you also don't lose your PTO. So one of the, under the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1933, there are three different versions of it. Number one, if you work for an elected official, you're not subject to the law. Number two, if you work for a state, or I'm sorry, a governmental entity is how it's worded, then there are certain provisions. For example, you don't get paid overtime. Instead of getting paid overtime, you get what they call paid time off, which is at the rate of 1.5 hours paid time off for every hour of overtime that you worked. So that is going to be, if you leave an agency, then that has to be paid to you within 30 days of the time you leave that agency in Texas. Same thing with your accrued vacation, unless you don't give those 2 weeks notice, okay, which is in most state agencies' files or policies. And then, of course, the third one is that applies to the general public, and that is if you work more than a 40-hour work week, then you have to have time and a half. Oh, wow. Yeah, and that's egregious in my opinion. That's, one of the things you don't want to do is people talk. And so even if you're an ex-employee, if you're an employee walking out of my company and you have really done us wrong, one of the things I want to do is I want to take good care of you until I no longer have any obligations with you whatsoever, because you're going to talk. And so as you tell people, that's going to affect my recruitment. So if I treat you poorly, you're going to badmouth my agency or my company to everybody around me. You're probably going to do that regardless of how well I treat you. But at least if I treat you well, I have proof that I did everything I could to try to assist you in the transition, that I treated you with respect and dignity. And, that way, as people come in, I can say, well, that's their side of the story. There's another side of the story. Here's the documentation, so we can do it that way as well. But, there's always two sides to every story. But as an HR person, what I want to do is I want to make sure that my company or my agency that I'm representing is always looked at as the good guy in the process. And so I do my best to make sure that that happens. So Fiasco says his hospital solution was just make it miserable to stay so people would quit and give any chances for employees to do better. I tell you, after my year in healthcare, I probably will never work in healthcare again. I wholeheartedly agree. I don't care where you are in healthcare. Healthcare employees are treated the worst of any that I have ever seen in all of my HR career. Healthcare and I are not suited for each other. So Keelan says, in Iowa, if you retire or resign for a reason other than discipline, okay, I don't see what you're saying. You get to keep it, I guess. I don't know. Virginia is all about the employer. Okay, so you accrue, let's say, sick leave or vacation leave, whichever one, or they can generically call it in the civilian world paid time off. So we're going to give you paid time off in the civilian world of 1 day per pay period. Okay, so you're going to get 26 paid days off per year. You can use that whenever you want. In healthcare, it's usually you earn 6 minutes of paid time off for every hour that you work. Okay. So they do it in basically, you have to work an hour to get X number of minutes or 3 minutes or whatever of paid time off. So that when it's used in the civilian world, paid time off can be used for any reason, whether it be sick leave, whether it be vacation or anything else. Now, a lot of companies still have a differentiation in their policies and procedures where you get, let's say, 12 days of sick leave per year and 18 or 5, 10, 15 days of vacation. So your sick leave, you don't have to give any advance notice to take sick leave. You call in and say, hey, I'm sick. Once those 12 days are done, then you basically, if you take the day off, you're taking the day off without pay, is the way that sick leave works. On the other hand, vacation leave, you have to plan that usually 2 weeks in advance. And it's going to be at least 3, but usually more than 3 days. So let's say I want to take a week off to go to Yellowstone. Well, then I put in my request a month in advance and I get my week's vacation and off I go to vacation. But that has to be well planned in advance. So a lot of companies are saying that's too hard to manage. We don't want to do that. So we're just going to give you 1 day of paid time off per pay period that you work. So pay period being 2 weeks. So you get 26 days of paid time off. Now, when you do it that way, in order to say, hey, I'm sick, I'm not coming in today, then they put a caveat on that. And they say, okay, we will pay you as long as you bring us a doctor's note stating that you were too sick to come to work. So in order to get that paid time off for sick leave, you have to provide documentation that you really were sick. Because otherwise, you have to have advance notice, right? Like under the vacation stuff. Now, that's in the civilian world. In the governmental world, paid time off is in addition to your normal vacation and sick leave. So I work a 41-hour week this week, and they're subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1933. That means that you have to give me 1.5 hours of paid time off. Now, that paid time off must be used within 1 year of the time that I earn it. So if I submit a request to you and I say, hey, I want to take my paid time off, I've got 8 hours, I want to take Friday off, and you say no, I keep that rejection, okay? because later on at the end of the year, when that paid time off expires, if you say, hey, you didn't use it, we're taking it off the books, you show your paper, you say, no, I requested it, you didn't give it to me. So then they have to keep it on the books for another year. So PTO means two different things, depending upon whether you're in the government or whether you're in the civilian world. Okay, so Wyoming has different laws. I wholeheartedly agree. And I have said the same thing, Theoxorus. I will not work in healthcare again. When we had to lay off a whole bunch of RNs, and when we started the Hillary Care, when we're getting ready for that, and the VP of HR, my boss, said, well, the way we're going to let the RNs know that they don't have a job is we're going to cancel their parking passes. So they had to pay $8 to park in the patient parking lot to find out that they weren't an employee anymore. I thought that was one of the most egregious things I had ever seen done to an employee in my life. Okay. So Holly says that he gets basically 2 days times 12, 24 days of sick leave per year. Devil Dog went from 1,000 hours to 72. Yeah, so different policies. You were acquired by a different company. Wow. Wow. Yeah, and that's federal. Federal's a lot. I tell you what, if I were to get another job, I would get a federal job. Federal employees get taken care of like you would not believe, and too well, in my opinion. You're also a highly educated, well-placed upper echelon salaried employee, Triple G. So I will tell you that there are a lot of wage earners who abuse the system. But the thing is, and this is a secret for any of you who ever want to get into the HR arena, you can have a bad policy as long as you equally and fairly apply a bad policy across the board to everybody, then you won't be in as much trouble as having a really good policy and then unequally applying it across the board. So what you do for one, you have to do for all, whether if it's a bad policy or a good policy. That's just the rule of HR. Yeah. Okay, let's get down here. Well, politicians don't have any protection at all, Celtic Grandma. So if you get a job, let's say as a secretary for a representative or a legislator, or for a senator or any elected position, you are not subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act at all. They don't even have to pay you minimum wage. You're not subject to the 40-hour work week. You're not subject to anything. They can give you whatever they want, and you have to be happy with it. But that's just, that's the way the law is written. Okay, let me see here. Okay. So here are some things. In 1798, we had the National Marine Service. We're talking about government health care and government health policy. The National Marine Service is established for the relief in sick and disabled seamen. In 1887, we had the National Institutes of Health. That's the one that's gotten into a lot of trouble here recently. The government's health research and education arm is established as a result of the Laboratory of Hygiene. It becomes the NIH in 1930. The Department of Health, Education, and Welfare is created by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953. In 1965, both Medicaid by the states for the poor people and Medicare for retired people receiving Social Security is passed. In 1979, the Department of Health and Human Services under President Jimmy Carter the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare that was created by President Eisenhower is split in two. So you have Health and Human Services out of the Health, Education, and Welfare. So that's Health and Welfare. And then you have the Department of Education. So those two are split in half, are split. So you have Health and Human Services and Education out of HEW. In 2006, we had Medicare Part B under President Bush. This program created an optional prescription drug insurance policy. And then in 2010, we had the Health Insurance Reform, Obamacare, and that's the National Health Insurance Program. Now, there are a couple of things of that I did like. There are a lot of things I didn't like. I can tell you some of the things I did like. Number one, it redefined from the the Federal Labor Standards Act, FLSA. FLSA, in order to be a full-time employee, you were 40 hours. Under Obamacare, it amended that to where it's 32 hours and above, you're considered a full-time employee. And so, certain things like that were good, in my opinion, but there were also other things that were bad. So mandating, it's the first time in the history of the U.S. government that we've ever mandated that a person must buy insurance, okay, at the federal level. Now, there's automobile insurance and everything else at the state level. Nobody had ever been forced to buy insurance before. And so I oppose to that. I'm totally opposed to that. There is nowhere under Article 1, Section 8 that gives the federal government the authority to force you to buy anything. The only place that you're forced to give money to the government at all is in the 13th Amendment. Let me check here. Could be the 16th. No, it is the 16th. 16th Amendment. Congress shall have the power to levy and collect taxes on income from whatever sources it is derived. So that's the only place that you're forced to give any money to the federal government at all is under the 16th Amendment. Okay, continuing on. Where are we time-wise? Oh my gosh, 47 minutes. Education. So we talked about the health and welfare part of the health, education, welfare. Now we're going to talk about education. So 20th century challenges. The National Defense Education Act of 1957, the NDEA, created national elementary and secondary education levels. They were emphasizing science and mathematics. Okay. Then we had liberal education reforms. After Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we had more and more federal mandated laws concerning education passed down to the states. And then we also had the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1968 that amended the NDEA of 1957. So these policies marked an important turning point in educational policy. Enforcement of civil rights legislation related to both race and gender, such as Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, required the national government to become increasingly involved in a policy area traditionally reserved for state and local governments. As a result, the national government, under the leadership of the Democratic President Jimmy Carter, established the Department of Education in 1979. So this is the one, okay, remember, up until 1979, basically, women's sports was not present that much in high school. Maybe tennis, a little bit of half-court basketball, but women's sports, if you didn't play football or baseball or basketball, you didn't have a sports program. So one thing that Title IX did was it separated those sports programs so that now you had to have equal but separate male and female sports. Okay, so that's where you had male baseball, female softball, male basketball, female basketball. Didn't have female football, but you did have a lot more domination of females in tennis. And then you also had track and field, which was equally applied across both. Now what we see is the another evolution of that, so that we're going back to where it was pre-1979, because we have this gender dysphoria. We're saying that we no longer need to separate the genders. We don't need separate boys and girls, because everybody can be what they claim to be as far as gender. Therefore, you can be on whichever side of that Title IX program you want to be on. And so, kind of now we are going through another evolution where we're basically doing away with Title IX and saying that, maybe there is no need to have gender differences in sports because, everybody wants to be on the other sport. Let me get a drink of water. I'm going dry, but my hip is surviving. Okay, then we have the No Child Left Behind Act of 2002 under President Bush. So it had four main pillars. Okay, first was you wanted results-oriented accountability. So that's where we have things like the STARS, which is the school testing and accountability and retraining standard or something like that. But each state has a set of final tests at certain key points in the educational process that children have to perform well on in order for them to continue to receive federal funding. Well, you remember we talked back at the very beginning, you have to go through that process of every once in a while we create a law and then you have to say, what is the law doing? Well, what we find out is that we no longer teach people how to think. We just teach them the answers to the test, okay? And so when Helen was teaching middle school, I was PTA president, and I went into a class once and waiting to talk to her. And I was sitting there, and the teacher who was presenting the class was teaching a history class. And he says, remember, I'm not going to tell you too much about this, but remember when if you see the question comes up that says, when you see the question, this is the answer. Okay, that's all I taught about it. But basically, it was it was the law, the Supreme Court decision that gave the Supreme Court power, their own power, to overturn anything and everything that either legislative or executive branches do. So Madison versus I forget what I'm not with it. You can tell I'm still kind of fuzzy from that fall this morning. I'm sorry. The second, the NCLB was designed to encourage state and local flexibility in the use of national funds. So here in Texas, we call that the Robin Hood plan. So you have enclaves. Remember, we do what are called independent school districts or consolidated school districts, either one. But you have the tax base. So that school district is based upon the educational tax that's collected at the local voter district or school district level. And so if you have a very high income school district and it's based off of the average appraised value of the home in that school district, they're going to have a lot more money to spend on education than is a more rural or a poorer neighborhood that doesn't have the same level of appraised value of homes, okay, per square mile. So in Texas, we take those federal funds and we say we're going to offset. If you're already making a whole bunch of money with local taxation, then you don't need federal funds that we're getting at the state level. We're going to give those to the poorer districts to try to balance everything out so that now they are having as equal a funding as the richer areas. And so we call that the Robin Hood plan. We're giving federal money to the poorer districts in order to try to equalize everything out. Now that even went a step further where the state passed a legislation that says that once you exceed a certain level of income based upon your home tax evaluation, then a surplus of that can be given to those poorer areas as well. So that's where really the Robin Hood part, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, comes in. The third pillar of NCLB envisions that the national government as a purveyor of proven methods of achieving high quality education and outcomes. So they give you the thought process of how to teach, methodologies, classroom techniques, recommended books, all these other different kinds of things. They think that since they are giving you the money, they have a right to tell you how to teach. Okay. And then, of course, the fourth one does not get mentioned that much. Okay. But it's called school choice. And so basically, that means that federal dollars follow the student in most cases, not the school district. So that means that if my child is going to an underperforming school and I want to withdraw my child from that school and put them into another school that has a better academic standing, then I have the right to do that. Now, that was given to us in 2009 under the NCLB, which is the National No Child Left Behind Act. Okay. So we could talk about the same things been done with energy and environmental policies. We've given the EPA way too much power. Just unbelievable amount of power, almost dictatorial power. And I worked for a state environmental agency. Remember that when I first retired from the Army, my first job was as a regional HR director, then as the agency HR director for the Texas Air Control Board, which was the air pollution control. Then Governor Ann Richards, that was her name, Senate Bill 2, she asked our board members to resign. They said, no, the reason we have staggered terms is so that no one governor can control the agency. She says, well, if you don't resign, then I'll do away with your agency. And she did. Senate Bill 2 took 13 different agencies, combined them all into one, and it was called the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission, TNRCC. And I was selected to be the HR director of that, but it got way too political. And so I left and went to the hospital system, St. David's. But we called it the train wreck, TNRCC. So the train wreck became such a common term for the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission that later on, about 6 years later, they changed the name to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, and that's what it is today. So if you want me to tell you about the power, the unmitigated power that EPA has, I've got experience in that field. I mean, they are fascistic in the way that they do things, and especially in the way that they come down with rules. Just unbelievable. Okay, so let me see. Where do American health expenditures go? 31.1% goes to hospital care, 21.4% goes to physicians, 16.2% to other health spending, 12.1% to other personal health care, 10.1% goes to prescription drugs, 5.9% goes to nursing home care, and 2 points goes to home health care. So, but the price of that continues to rise just unbelievably. Let me see, and that's pretty much it. So we got 2 more chapters left in this book. Some announcements. So Michelle Mitten Prepper is an ex-Army combat medic. And so once we finish this book, I'm going to start doing interviews. So I've got her lined up for the first Monday in July. And so we're going to start doing some interviews. I've also got Kathy. She and I are working to see when it's going to be a suitable time for her. She is the CEO of another one of my favorite freeze-dried food companies, a company called Shelf to Table. And so I'm working with her, see if I can get her on and have her talk about freeze-dried food, pretty much the same as we did with Eric Christensen, CEO of Nutrient Survival. So I'm going to see if we can't get Kathy in here to talk about that. Let me catch up on the chat. And so Title IX is the law that basically separated out women's and men's sports in the education system. Stray kitten. Yeah, and you know, one of the things that one of the biggest things is photocopy expenses. So when I owned my store, I gave a 50% discount for any photocopying that was done at the store, which means I was basically taking a little bit of a loss. any health, not healthcare, education, any teacher that wanted to do student notes or handouts or anything like that and have them photocopied, they could come to my store and I gave them. Typically, I charge 10 cents a copy for black and white, and I charge them 5. So that's one of the ways. If you can help out by donating, photocopy supplies, whether it be toner or money or paper, that's a big assistance you can give to your local school. Okay. Okay. So what other questions do you have for this evening? We're right at an hour, which is great. So we are under a severe thunderstorm warning right now. We're expecting to get really hit hard again. We've had all kinds of tornadoes and flooding. The other day, last week, we got 2 inches in 4 hours. And so it was pretty flooded. But I hope all of you stay safe and sheltered. Weird weather patterns going on right now, very weird. And remember that this coming Saturday, coming up, is the official beginning of hurricane season. So be prepared for that as well. So this is how you shall bless the Israelites. And I say bless everybody. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. Remember that tomorrow night we're working on the second part of chapter 2 of James Wesley Rawles' book, The End of the World as We Know It, How to Survive It. Teotwaki, he came up with the term. On Thursday, we're doing our discussion of 299 Days, The Preparation by Glenn Tate. I will tell you, I was very disappointed to start off. Kind of like reading Pillars of the Earth by Forsyth. I think I got into 178 pages of that book before I finally got, whoa! Well, this one is slow for the first 11, 12 chapters. But once you get past chapter 11, chapter 12, you know how I am about taking notes on my note cards? Look at this. I got a card and a half. I have never had this many notes on preparedness, on things that are really, really important to you and to me as preppers that are being contained as information provided in a fictional book. Really great. So starting at chapter 13, but you've got to have the first 12 chapters as set up in order to really appreciate chapter 13 and on. But I tell you what, once you get that far, you just can't put it down. It gets extremely addictive. I can't wait to see what he does in volume 2. We may do volume 2 for the month of July. I'll have to wait and see. I'll announce that on Thursday. One of the things that Kathy did ask me, the CEO from Shelf to Table, she asked me, so I want you to be ready to give me some suggestions tomorrow night. We'll talk about it real quick tomorrow night. Just tell me, what are some of the things that you would like to see available to you as freeze-dried? I told her that there are 2 things that her company has that I can't find anywhere else except for one company that's just super expensive. And she has meatloaf, which is what I normally order, and she has good pork sausage, breakfast sausage. So those 2 things, the links. So those are 2 things I order from her place on a regular basis. I think they're really, really great and important to have. I'll probably have some more. I just put in another order, so I'll probably have some this week's Pepper Haul this coming Saturday. I also have a nutrient survival order that I didn't want to throw into this last week. It would overwhelm you. So I've set it aside for this next week. So I probably will have 2 commercial orders, nutrient survival order, and then a shelf to table order. And that'll be for this coming Saturday's Prepper Pantry Haul. Wow, a lot going on. And then I've got all kinds of other stuff going on this week as well. So remember that we're all in this together. Thank you so much. Oh, Northern Girl Hobbies. She likes Pillars of the Earth too. And so did Faye Oxers. Wow. So we kind of have the same reading taste. Okay. Remember that we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together. Please continue, because you do such a great job as it is. Continue to be the wonderful, kind, polite, respectful people that you are. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. It's getting to the point where I can almost say, I love y'all. Okay. So remember that we're all in this together, so we come out the other side together, because togetherness is the only thing that's going to see us through this. So thank you. I'll see you tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. We're going to continue to work on chapter 2 of Teotwaki, How to Survive It. Take care, everybody. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.